All right. So on page 751 in your textbook, right, there's a cool little statue of Homer. Everybody say Homer. Okay, good, right? He wrote down the epics, right? He wrote down the Iliad, he wrote down the Odyssey, and we are reading the Odyssey, right? So there's a little statue of Homer. The way that he did things when he wrote down his epic poem set the standard to set the base for all epic poems to come. All right. So later, when they wrote other epics, right, different authors went back and wrote their own epic poems. They based everything they did off of the way Homer did things, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So if something is successful, let's do it the same way that somebody else successfully did. Does that make sense to you guys? All right. So on page 751, right? 751, we have the epic form. So all of those bullet points right there, you say bullet points, right? Those are the things that Homer did that other people continue to do as well. All right, let's start at the top, right? Let's read at the top there, right underneath where it says the epic form, right? An epic is a long narrative poem that relates important events in the history of folklore of the culture that produced it. Its central character or epic hero, everybody say epic hero, is larger than life figure who embodies traits that the culture values. Typical among those characteristics are physical strength, bravery, high birth, fame, and effective skills as a leader and in battle, right? That perfectly describes our epic hero, right? His name is Odysseus. Everybody say Odysseus. Perfect. He is our epic hero. He has those values. All right, that's one. That's one of the bullet points that's not included down there, right? Is that an epic poem has an epic hero. The Iliad and the Odyssey influenced virtually all the great Western epics that followed them. All right, and then it lists and talks about these different epics that followed the Iliad and the Odyssey. Right, Homer wrote those two down. Right, the Iliad is over the Battle of Troy. Right, everybody say Troy. All right, the Iliad is over the Battle of Troy. It focuses on Achilles. Right, he is the hero. He's the epic hero in the Iliad, Achilles. All right, and he was one of the great warriors in the battle. All right, and that's why it focuses on him. However, Odysseus was also in the Battle of Troy. All right, Odysseus was also in the Battle of Troy, and he was another great warrior, and he came up with the idea of the Trojan horse. All right, we'll talk about that a little more in a second. All right, so think of it as the Iliad is the first book in the series, and the Odyssey is the sequel. Right, we have a first and a second. Right, we're not reading the Iliad in here; we're jumping straight to the sequel of the Odyssey. All right, are you following with me so far? All right, good. Now we're on the bullet points right down there at the bottom. All right, everybody say bullet points again. All right, it says opening invocation to the muse. All right, what is an invocation? Do you know what an invocation is? Have you ever heard the term vocabulary? Or have you ever heard the word invocation? What do you guess? You can't remember where it is when you've heard it before. Ben, do you have any ideas? What? I've heard it too, but I don't. You can't remember where? Okay. So if you go to church on a Sunday morning, you might have a deacon. It might be the pastor. It could just be the little old lady that maybe everybody calls grandma, right? And they give an invocation. It's an opening prayer, right? It's an opening prayer, okay? So in this case, obviously, right, they're not praying to the God that we know, right? They're praying to the Greek gods and goddesses. And specifically in this case, right, it's an invocation to the what? What does it say there? Invocation to the muse, right? M-U-S-E. Invocation to the muse. We'll learn about what the muses are when we start reading the story in 1 second. Oh, sorry. Invocation to the muse, all right? So it's an opening prayer asking for inspiration, asking for blessing, asking for help in the storytelling, right? In the reciting of the poem, right? He's asking the muse for help, right? The muses were the goddesses of arts and sciences. So he was praying specifically to the muse of poetry, of epic poetry, asking for her blessing and her help as he tells the story of the Odyssey. All right. I just passed out. It says quiz on it, but it's not a quiz, right? They're logbook questions. All right. So we're going to answer these questions as we read through the Odyssey. All right. So number one, right? It says in the beginning, who does the narrator call on to help him tell the story of the Odyssey? Who did we just talk about? The muse, right? The muse. He calls on the muse for help. All right. Good. So that was bullet point number one here, right? Opening invocation to the muse. That's one of the first characteristics of an epic poem. So whenever you read another epic poem in your future high school and college career, you'll notice at the very beginning of the poem they call on help from guess who? The muse, right? So you will see that again. The next bullet point, right? It says that it starts in media res. We talked about media res earlier this year. Do you remember what that means? Our story starts where? At the beginning? In the middle, right? In the middle. Somebody brought up Deadpool, right? Deadpool at the beginning of the movie, he's got an action scene, right? He's dodging cars. Bullets are actually, I think, going through him. Okay, but he heals from it or whatever. It's one of his powers, right? But then it's a freeze frame, right? It zooms in on his face and it says, "You're probably wondering how I got here," right? You're probably wondering how I got here. And then he goes back. So he starts, if this were a timeline, if this board were a timeline here, okay? Deadpool's right here, right? You're probably wondering how I got here, right? Then he goes back to the beginning of the timeline and tells us how we got to that point. And then our story continues to the end, right? So another characteristic, right, from Homer's epic poems, right? Another characteristic that he puts in place is that they start in the middle in media res. All right? Any questions there? Knock on wood if you're with me. All right, go. All right. Some of the other characteristics, bullet points of an epic poem is it's got lofty style, right? So elevated speech, right? Often uses a lot of vocabulary words. We'll have to learn the meaning of some of these words. All right. And it's the Greek culture, right? So they just have a different way of saying things anyway. It's got an objective tone, right? We just talked last Friday about objective and subjective. Right? Objective means what?
He's not really partial.
Yeah, he's not partial, right? We don't really pick a side. You just shoot it straight, right? You tell it how it is, factual, right? If you're subjective, you're going to be biased, right? I'm going to try to persuade you to think the way I think, subjective, right? It's going to be, I'm going to view it with a bias. I'm going to be partial. Objective is not. And then we have meter, right? Let's read what it says behind meter there. Right? Meter or a fixed rhythmic pattern. A strong meter helps the oral poet remember the lines. In the original Greek, the Odyssey uses hexameter or 6 beats to a line, which helps create a fast pace. So remember, this was originally told orally by word of mouth. And it's a poem and it's got a rhythmic beat. Right? And so they would sing it, right? That's how they remembered it. That's how they would store it in their memory, right? Is that they would sing it like a song. Right? Do you guys have a lot of songs memorized? Yeah, songs, it's easier to memorize things when it's put to a beat, right? When there's music behind it and all that, right? So that's what they did, right? They have a meter, a fixed beat behind it, and it helped them memorize it and sing it and recite it. Next, we have an epithet. Everybody say epithet. All right, that's a characterizing phrase for a person, place, or thing. All right, recurring epithets are easy to remember and can help fill out their meter. Some examples of Homer's epithets include the rosy-fingered dawn, right? That's an epithet for the sun, right? It's a characterization. It's describing the sun when it's rising in the morning, right? Rosy-fingered, right? It's kind of red, right? Rosy as its fingers, right? The rays are shining as it's coming up over the horizon. Rosy-fingered dawn, okay? And then another one is son of Laertes, son of Laertes, right? That's for Odysseus, right? So Odysseus is known for being the son, right, to his father. Is anybody else known because of one of their parents? It's like, yeah, that's the Sutterfield boy, right? That's probably a good epithet for Ben, right? He's one of those Sutterfields. Is that fair for me to say? Yeah. Okay. Does anybody else have an epithet like that they're known by? Kind of, sort of. Is anybody known for being like a little brother or little sister to somebody? Who's your older sibling? Yep, you're Ronnie's little sister, aren't you? Do you get tired of that? Yes, I can feel the attitude. I can feel it. Okay. All right. Anybody else? Nobody else has an epithet like that? All right. Well, so Odysseus is the son of Laertes. All right. He also is called, this is pretty cool, right? The raider of cities, right? The raider of cities, right? That's a pretty dope one, isn't it? Okay. Easton Collier, right? The sacker of quarterbacks. Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah, it's a little football one for you. All right. So it's a characterization of an action that they did, right? Or somebody they're related to, right? Or something that they do, a description of them. All right. And a lot of times, right, that's what they would put on maybe their tombstone once they passed away, right? So we say Odysseus, right, son of Laertes, raider of cities, right? Which we still do that now, right? We say how we're related to people on tombstones, right? So it's similar. And then an epic simile, right? What is a simile, Ian? Exactly, right? An epic just means long, right? So an epic simile is a really long simile, right? Normally a simile will be about a sentence long. An epic simile is going to be at least a paragraph, right? It's like an extended metaphor, right? But it's using the words like or as, so now it's an epic simile, all right? So know the difference there. All right, good. Turn the page, turn the page. Let's learn about the Trojan War. All right, let's learn about the Trojan War here. All right, so has anybody seen the movie 300? No? Okay. So that refers to the group of the Spartans, right? From Sparta. Okay. And we have King Menelaus, right? He's the ruler of Sparta. And he's married to this girl called Helen. Everybody say Helen. Helen. Okay. Well, Helen, married to King Menelaus, quickly becomes Helen of Troy, right? So Helen and Menelaus are married. All right. But now she goes to Troy and she's in Troy with Paris. All right. Paris falls in love with Helen as well. So we have this love triangle, right? Paris and Helen in love. Menelaus married to Helen. All right. So Menelaus not happy, right? He wants Helen back. So what he does is he goes to his big brother, right? Who is the leader of the Greeks. And he says, hey, big brother, I need you to help me out. Right? This guy took my girl. Right? He took my girl. I got to go get her back. Right? Well, big brother is going to come through. Right? So he's like, hey, we're going to war against Troy. Right? The Greek nation, we're going to go fight Troy. Well, they have this pact that if one Greek nation goes to war, they agreed they would all go to war. Right? So Odysseus, he's from Ithaca. Right? Ithaca is like, yeah, hey, we're part of that pact. If we're going to war, we're going to war. So all the Greeks go to Troy. Right? And they're fighting Troy. Now the problem is Troy has a wall around its city. Right? Troy has a wall around its city. And so you can't get in. It's almost impenetrable. Right? It's almost impossible. Actually, they spend 10 years. 10 years trying to break the wall, and the Greeks can't do it. And the Greeks can't do it. Right? So that is the story of the Iliad. Right? That's the Iliad. That's the first book. Right? That's the first epic poem, right, that Homer writes. Right? Now, eventually, right, there's a guy, right? Achilles is battling and he's awesome, but eventually there's a guy named Odysseus, and he has this idea. Did we talk about this yet? What was his idea, Gwen?
It was to develop a wooden force and put like a Greek army inside of it to get inside without having to break down the palace wall.
Yeah, right. So we can't break it down, right? We tried, we can't break it down. So instead, we're going to build a wooden horse, right? Just like Gwen said, right? And I know my artistic ability is unmatched. Okay, you don't know why I'm an English teacher because I'm so good at art. I get that. I get that a lot, actually. Okay. All right, so we have our wooden horse here. It's incredible, isn't it? Okay, now there is one, right? It's made of wood, right? That's why I put those little planks. Now there's one key here, right? This one at the bottom is a secret hatch that they don't notice. Right? So the Greeks say, hey, look, we've been trying to get into your wall for 10 years. We can't do it. We built you this wooden horse as a peace offering. We're going to leave it here in front of the gate, and we're going to leave. Right? We're out. We're going to pack up the chips and go home. So they leave the Trojan horse outside the wall. They go back to the beach. They start packing up their boats, acting like they're going to sail off. Right? A couple of them even set sail, and they start to leave. Right? Well, the army, right? A lot of the Greek army, including Odysseus and Achilles, are hiding inside of the horse. Right? There's Greeks all inside that horse. So they pull it in at nighttime. They think the boats have left. They're good. They pull it in. The sun goes down. Everybody goes to sleep. Right? They think the war is over. Right? Well, they sneak out and they open the gates to the city. Right? And the Greeks who are hiding all come storming back in, and they set siege to the city. Right? They're rampaging and fighting and killing, setting fire, right, to the inside of Troy, right? And they completely demolish it, right? They completely demolish it. They win the battle. They take Helen back, right? It's over, right? It's over. So the saying goes, right? All is fair in what, Mr. Collier? All is fair in what? Love and war, right? That's the saying. That's how it goes. The gods disagreed, right? The gods are upset. Some of the gods were impressed with Odysseus and his ideas. The other gods who were on Troy's side, right? They were in favor of Troy, not the Greeks, right? But hey, that's not okay. We can't let that slide, right? That was below the belt. That shouldn't have been allowed, right? And so what they do is they want to punish Odysseus. They want to punish the Greeks, right, for kind of not playing by the rules, right? Not playing by the expectations. And so what they do is they make the trip home miserable, right? They make it last, for Odysseus, it lasts 10 years. And for others, right, they never make it home, right? They die before they get home, all right? So the gods don't like that, all right? So that's the Iliad, right? The story of Troy, all right? Turn to page 757 now. Did you have a question, Easton?
Yeah, so Odyssey is a god.
Odysseus is not a god, no. He's just a regular man. He is a king, but he is a regular man. All right, so Odysseus has a fleet of ships. He's got a fleet of boats. He's the king of Ithaca, so all these men are going with him trying to get back home to Ithaca. Everybody say Ithaca. All right, Ithaca is way over here on the other side of the map. Drew my nice little house on top there. All right, big I for Ithaca. All right, good. Okay, so we're on page 757, all right, the adventures of Odysseus, right, the Odyssey from Homer, written by Homer, right? This is the moment that we always talk about, right? Right before you start reading the story, right? Your life's about to change forever, right? You can never go back and reread the story for the first time. This is it, right? Big moment, electricity in the air. I can see it in your eyes. I can feel it, the excitement. All right, here we go. Here we go. In the opening verses, Homer addresses the muse of epic poetry. He asks her help in telling the tale of Odysseus. If you look over to the right, there are 9 goddesses of arts, literature, and sciences. Right? He was praying to the muse, the invocation of the muse, asking her blessing as he tells this story. Sing in me, muse, and through me tell the story of that man. Who is that man? Odysseus, right? That man, skilled in all ways of contending and all ways of fighting, he is skilled. The wanderer, harried for years on end after he plundered the stronghold on the proud height of Troy. So when Troy was at its highest as a civilization, Odysseus alone took it down. He was that man, right? That dude. Have y'all heard that before? He is that dude. All right, turn the page. We're on page 758. Right, there's the list of characters you can always refer back to if you need help pronouncing the words or if you need to know how they fit into the story. Right, so 759, sailing from Troy. Sailing from Troy. 10 years after the Trojan War, Odysseus departs from the goddess Calypso's island. He arrives in Phaeacia, ruled by Alcinous. Alcinous offers a ship to Odysseus and asks him to tell of his adventures. This is the in medio res part, right? So the Iliad, right? The Iliad, the story of Achilles fighting in the Trojan War, right? In the Trojan horse, that lasted for 10 years. Now, Odysseus and his men are setting sail from Troy, trying to get back to Ithaca. All right? That's also going to be 10 years. So don't get confused here. The Odyssey is 10 years long. Are we good? How long does the Odyssey last? Good. The Iliad is 10 years long. How long does the Iliad last? So how long is Odysseus gone from home? 20. Good. How long is the Odyssey? 10. Okay, don't want you to get confused, right? The Odyssey is 10 years long, right, Kason? But he's gone for a total of 20. Right? Our story is the sequel. It lasts 10 years. So he sets sail from Troy. All right? In the gray box, it just told us, right? 10 years after the war. Right? So this is 10 years after the war, and he is with King Alcinous on Phaeacia. Right? We're with King A on Phaeacia. And that's the in media res part. Right? So it tells us he leaves Calypso's island and ends up here. Right? So here's Calypso's island. She has a little inlet with the sea. All right. What does that look like? C7, right? C for Calypso, 7 for how many years he was on her island, right? So he was on Calypso's island for 7 years, which is number 2 on your worksheet there. Now, remember, he was trapped on Calypso's island. He was under her magic, right? She's a goddess. He was under her spell, right? She was using him for her pleasure, all right? And he was unable to break the spell, right? She had control over him. He could not leave, all right? So he was there for 7 years. The only reason he actually even gets to leave is because of a goddess named Athena, right? So Athena goes to Zeus. Make sure you're following along on your worksheet. Athena goes to Zeus. Right? And Athena likes Odysseus because she is the goddess of war and wisdom. All right? How does Odysseus handle war? Did he handle it well? Yes, right? With a little bit of strategy, right? And wisdom as well, right? This was a creative idea, was it not? The wooden horse? Absolutely. Right? So Athena favors him because of that. So she goes to Zeus and says, hey, please let Odysseus leave and go home. Zeus is like, okay, Athena, you're my favorite daughter. If that's what you want, I'll let you have it, right? Odysseus can go home, right? But I'm not going to do it myself. Hermes, go tell him for me, right? Hermes is the god of what? Messenger and commerce, right? Business, right? Commerce and messaging, right? So Hermes, I'm going to draw a little sandal here, all right, with a wing on it. Hermes goes, looks like a reindeer, but whatever. Okay, it's the season, right? All right, so that's a flip flop. I don't know. That's a flip flop with some wings on it. Okay, I promise. All right, and he goes to Calypso and he says, "Hey, Calypso, boss man Zeus says that you got to let Odysseus go." Right? Athena said something to him. I don't know what happened. I was just told. Here's the message: Odysseus has got to be set free. All right, so Calypso actually helps Odysseus build like a raft, smaller boat looking thing. All right, and he sets sail again. Here's the problem, right? There's still a lot of gods and goddesses out there that don't like Odysseus. All right, so boom, storm hits, right? Destroys his raft. Okay, and he ends up on the island here. Poor Odysseus washes up naked. He's hiding under some bushes and leaves, trying to stay warm. The princess finds him, thinks he's kind of cute, right? Because Odysseus is awesome in stature and good looks, right? So even after swimming through a storm in the middle of the night naked, he still looks good. Okay, I don't know how he does it. But she's like, hey, you look kind of cute. My dad can help you. He's actually the king of this place, all right? So why don't you come over to my house later and he can help you out. Right, Easton? Okay, good. Making sure you're awake. All right. Thank you. All right. And so he's like, yeah, let me I don't know, put together some fig leaves or something. I'll be right over. All right. Just give me some time. I'll be there later. Right. So he shows up later. They're having like a mini Olympics party festival thing. So there's guys competing. They try to talk Odysseus into doing some stuff. He dominates them. It's boring because he just kills the games. Okay. He throws the discus like a mile and a half. All right. And they're playing music and they're singing songs and they start singing songs about the Battle of Troy. Right. Because it was 10 years since this point. Right? It was 10 years since this point. So they're reveling in the glory of the great warriors. They don't know that this is Odysseus. They start singing about Achilles and Odysseus and the brotherhood and Achilles dying and Odysseus gets emotional. Right? And finally, he's like, I'm good, I'm good. And then finally they keep singing, he keeps crying, right? And the king is like, dude, just tell me who you are. He's like, look, I'm Odysseus. I'll tell you how I got here if you just let me have a boat. Like if you give me a boat, I'll be gone tomorrow. And I can tell you the whole story. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. The Odysseus? Like the one we were singing about? You're that guy? Why aren't you home yet? That was 10 years ago. So then he starts to tell his story, right? He's like, the god smited me, right? And that's where we get the in media res, right? He leaves Calypso's island, goes to King Alcinous on Phaeacia, right? And they say, how did you get here? Right? So that freeze frame, right? You might be wondering how I got here. King Alcinous is like, that's literally what I'm asking you 3 times now. Right? He says, well, I left Troy, and this is what happens, right? He starts walking it through. So he says, I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Are you with me on line 1, or that first line there? Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. And then he goes on about how he's from Ithaca, right? He tells us how he's from Ithaca, and there's other islands to the south and the east of Ithaca, right? And they're pretty, but they're nothing like Ithaca, all right? That's where he is the king. That's where he is home. That's where his wife and son live, who he loves dearly. And he says, I was on Calypso's island for 7 years. She kept me there against my will, right? If you go down to line 28, right? I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight, as Circe of Aea. Everybody say Circe. Right, so he was detained against his will by her also earlier in his journey. All right, we'll learn more about her later. But in my heart, this is important for us to know if we're going to defend Odysseus' character. Right? It says, in my heart, I never gave consent. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? And far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. Even if he found a house of gold, right, he still would rather be at home with his family. All right. And he says, what of my sailing then from Troy? What happened after I left Troy? He talks about how he leaves Troy with his fleet, right? They set sail, all right? They're planning on just going south and then straight across. That's the plan, right? So they come to this island, and it's called Ismarus, all right? Lowercase I, Ismarus, all right? His men lose control, right? They're wanting to party and celebrate after winning the Trojan War, and the innocent people of Ismarus, right, are taken advantage of, right? His men show up and they take their food, they take their wine, they take their cattle, right? They storm their homes, they even take their women, right? And Odysseus is trying to stop them, right? He's like, stop, like this is not okay. You cannot do this, right? And they don't listen to him. So later we find out that he kind of retreats and he goes to an old friend's house that lives on Isthmus and he stays with him, and that friend gives him a gift, which he'll use later, right? We'll talk more about that later on, right? Finally, what happens is the people of Ismarus, they go back to the big city, right? They go inland, and they say, hey, we need the army to come help us. The army, the Sicones, everybody say Sicones. Yeah, the Sicones show up, and they start finding Odysseus' men and killing them because all of his men are drunk and full and sleepy, right? Because they've been in just gluttony this whole time. And so they start killing Odysseus and his men, at least. So then they have to get back on the boat, leave, right? They're like, okay, Odysseus, you were right. Like, we shouldn't have done that. Let's go. Now, on their boats, there's big sails, right? There's a big mast, right, that'll blow them. But if there's no wind blowing, what do they have to do? They have to row, right? So they have these benches, these row benches that they sit on. And in each boat, 6 benches were now empty because of how many people were killed by the Sicones, right? So they lost quite a bit of people, all right? So here's my boats now. We're set sailing. All right, I'm going to draw 3 boats just to show the loss of people there. All right. So now we've left Ismarus. All right. Good deal. Turn the page. Now they set sail again. All right. And Zeus is not happy with them. All right. Zeus is not happy with the way, again, Odysseus handled the Trojan War. And now he's not happy that they attacked the innocent Sicones. So what happens is, right? Another storm, right? And he also sends a wind current that blows them off course. All right, so they were going to go straight east from there. That's not going to work. They're blown off course by a wind current called Malea, and they land on another island here called the land of the, do you have a guess? Do you read it there? Good, land of the lotus eaters. All right, you might be familiar with the lotus plant from Percy Jackson. All right, it has a similar effect, right? Similar effect that it does in the movie as it does on the men here, right? So they get to this island. Odysseus has a good idea. He says, I'm going to send 2 of you to be scouts, right? So you and you go scout out the island, and you're going to be the messenger, and you're going to run back and forth and report to me and tell me what they're seeing. Well, those 3 people go out. They never come back, right? They meet the lotus eaters. They meet the people there, and they're like, hey, we mean you no harm. Try some of this, right? They eat the lotus, right? What kind of effect does it have on them? Yeah, numbing effect, right? They just kind of sit there and daze out, right? And sit there and daze out. Odysseus views it as it's taking away their hope for home, right? That's how he describes it. He gives them no desire to want to go home anymore. So Odysseus, right? He is like, hey, we haven't heard from those guys in a while. I'm going to go see what's going on, right? He's a good leader. He goes, he finds those 3 men. He kind of observes what's going on from a distance and finds out, oh no, like that plane is taking away their desire to go home. So what he does is he actually gets all three of them, throws them over his shoulder like they're little kids throwing a temper tantrum, right? Drags them back to the boat and ties them to their bench, right, where they row, and ties them down. He's like, hey, everybody, let's set sail. Let's get out of here, right? He actually says on line 101 on page 761, I drove them all three whaling to the ships, tied them down under the rowing benches, and called the rest. All hands aboard, come, clear the beach, and no one taste the lotus, or you lose your hope of home. Filing into their places by the rowlocks, my oarsmen dipped their long oars in the surf, and we moved out again on our sea faring. All right, yes. Thank you. All right, so that's where we're going to stop for the day, right? We're setting sail. We are leaving, right? We're leaving the Lotus Eater, all right? We're setting sail, still trying to get home. All right, good job today. Any questions?